Hello, my name is Brian, and I'm the Theoretical Gamer. Basically, I'm going to talk about a company which is not really a company. It's called Gratis Games, and it's basically this one guy called Blackie the Blackball who likes making retro clones and mashups. He did one called Dark Dungeons, which is really good. He did a few other things, but I'm here to talk about something just because it's a small little thing he did, and I find it interesting, and I'm curious to see how it works out in play. It's like it's like about 14 pages long, and it's called 3-Point-Y, a what if supplement. Now, this thing has a little bit of a story behind it, a story that Blackie himself tells, and he admits that it may or may not be true. The facts are true. The motivations and the reasons behind the story may not be. The idea is this. Once upon a time there was a game we all are familiar with. It's called Dungeons and Dragons. It was created by TSR. It went through many editions, and then TSR died. It got picked up by Wizards of the Coast, and Wizards of the Coast decided to come up with 3rd edition. 3rd edition, although it was really much higher number, if you want to be strictly accurate, it was a much higher number than 3rd edition, because there were a number of editions before. There was the basic, there was the old white box, there was the old chainmail stuff. But for semantic purposes, let's just call it 3rd edition because that's what they called it. Now, they published it, and it was bought by a whole new generation of gamers who this was their first role-playing game. They had never played anything like this before. And that's where the interesting part happens, because what 3rd edition had been designed by guys who had played D&D before, who entered into the game with a certain set of assumptions. These assumptions involved that things were simple. Character classes were iconic. You had a guy who was the fighter, you had a guy who was the magic user, etc. You go back far enough, there wasn't even race and class division. So you had a guy who played the elf, or a guy who played the halfling. But then the next generation came in and started playing 3rd edition. They had none of these assumptions. So they came in and started playing it a totally different way. It all became all about the build. They came up with all cool ideas like, hey, they would sit down and they would multi-class, and they would figure out the optimum way, the optimum combination of stats and feats and classes to create the perfect character, right? And of course, a lot of the old school ones, especially the ones with funny voices, would say, oh, well, they're not real role players. All they care about is the numbers. They don't care about getting into character. And which is not true. Because I think that there is a joy in figuring out the perfect way to express your character through this build. And it was all about character build, and caster dominance was a big thing. It was, right? So, rather than rebel against this, the creators of 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons came up with a revised version, which they waggishly called 3.5. It was not a new edition. It was a revision of the old edition. And what they decided they wanted to do was bring the game in line with this new style of play, because they realized that the new generation was going a different direction, and they decided to embrace this. But what if they didn't? What if they decided to encourage old school style of play? And they created a 3.5 which, went in a different direction. Well, Blackie the Blackball came up with that. He came up with 3.Y, a what if supplement. That first of all, you go to his site, and it'll give you a link to the original 3rd edition SRD, System Reference Document, that you can download, and therefore have all the rules to play original 3rd edition. And then you apply 3-Point-Y to make it the new alternate universe 3.5. Now, about 99% of the game is going to be the same as old 3rd edition, but it's these little changes that make all the difference. And Lucky the Black Ball, he can't help but put his own little tweaks into it. Ability score generation. I don't know if he got this from like an older edition or if he made it up himself, but it is kind of cool. The idea is it's semi-random. What you do is you take the standard and correct method of 4 die 6, drop the low die, which, yes, that's what everybody does. And what you do is the players sit down and roll 4 die 6, drop the low die 36 times, and put them just, in a 6 by 6 grid. Then, when you create your characters, you have your stats in order, 3rd edition order, which is, strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, charisma. And you choose a line from this grid. If you look right there, you'll see that the grid of numbers. So you can choose a straight line across, or down, or up, or across, or diagonal, which gives you 28 choices of number strings to choose from. So you can cut, which basically means, I'm sure that at one point, someone tried this, and just from pure randomness, there was a stream that was all 18s across, and everyone picked it. But odds are that's not going to happen. And what happens is you keep this number block, and you keep it on file. So if your character dies and you want to make up a new one, you use that block. If a new character joins, if a new player shows up and says, "Can I join your campaign?" you use that block. That is your campaign block of attribute numbers. Interesting. Now, the 3rd edition SRD has officially, if you look at it, it has the Scion, the psionic power guy, as one of the standard classes. And the personal touch that Blackie decided was that in his mind, he decided to change the favored class of elves from wizard to Scion. And his reasoning was that A, no one had Scion as a favored class at this point, and B, he had this mental image of elves as this kind of aloof, ethereal race that kind of communicated telepathically, kind of like you saw, that Lord of the Rings thing where they just, which I can kind of see that. Now the big difference is multi-classing. It does not exist in the 3rd edition style. What happens is this. You have no prestige classes. Bye-bye. The classes are going back to their iconic nature, which basically means the class you choose at first level is the class you stick with. However, you can do multi-classing in the class, but it's more in the class of 1st and 2nd edition style, which basically means if you can be a dual class character or a triple class character. So, which means if you decide I'm going to be a wizard thief or a wizard rogue, you start off at first level with 1 level of wizard and 1 level of rogue. And the document here gives you details on how you determine feats and hit points and stuff like that for multiple classes. But what ends up happening is in the early levels, you go up slowly compared to the single class guy until you effectively end up 2 levels behind. And if you play a triple class, eventually you'll get left behind until you're 3 levels behind. Which, if you've got 3 characters, one is a fighter, one is a wizard rogue, and the other is a fighter wizard rogue. The first guy, the fighter, once you hit 10th level, he's going to be 10th. He's going to be 10th level. The dual class guy is going to be 8th level in both his classes, and the triple class guy is going to be 7th level in all of his classes. This is, significantly behind, but not ridiculously or game-breakingly behind as it is in the current multi-classing system. Whereas, whereas the double class guy, if he advances at the same rate, is going to be at 5th level, and the triple class guy is going to be like 3rd or 4th level compared to the 10th level guy. In other words, can't keep up. It's basically, by allowing multiclassing that way, it's effectively telling you not to multiclass unless you only want to have 1 or 2 levels of a certain class for flavor, or unless you're building towards a prestige class. But there's other minor changes. But the one thing that he did was he took a prestige class from the SRD called the Soul Knife and upgraded it to a full base class that you can play starting at 1st level. And the reason he did this, he even says, this is for no better reason than that it is a favorite of the author who wishes it to be available despite the general lack of prestige classes. So he spends a couple of pages, describing his pet class. Then there's skill changes, magic psionic changes. Oh wow, this is one of those things, and I don't know if it's this is interesting. I don't know if he stole this from an earlier game, and I kind of like it. It would be an interesting variation on D&D, because the idea was, in the earliest versions of D&D, you got experience points for treasure. And I've heard it described as a good way to do it because of the fact that it is, the treasure symbolizes not only the treasure itself, but it symbolizes everything you had to do to get that treasure. So it's like, so if you get Smaug's treasure at the end of The Hobbit, well, that huge ass treasure symbolizes all the travel, all the monsters you had to fight, all the sneaking in and facing down the dragon. Later editions, like 3rd edition, basically says a lot of the basically by killing monsters. So you get so it used to be in the earliest editions, the fighter might, go in and kill all the monsters and get the treasure. But if the thief snuck past all the monsters and disarmed all the traps and just did thief things, and he still got the treasure, he'd still get the same amount of experience, even though he didn't kill all the monsters. Right. That's because, because he did it in a thiefly way. Right. This version of it, and I think it's interesting, you don't get, it goes back sort of to the old way, but you don't get experience for gaining treasure. You get it for spending treasure, and that treasure that you spend on XP, effectively you're buying XP with your treasure. And the idea is this: the XP, the treasure you spend, you can rationalize it any way you go. It's like you could spend it on ale and partying, or you can spend it on or like rebuilding the town you trashed, or spend it on the local charity, old paladin style, right? How you get rid of the money doesn't matter; it just goes away. But you get experience points, money that you use to say to get things like buying equipment or bribing people or actually spending it in game to get a specific thing. Well, you know what? You get the thing you bought, right? So if you spend half your treasure and it kind of, the assumption that they come up with is that half of it is going to be spent on useful things, and the other half is going to be spent on XP, right? If you want to live an austere life and never buy anything, you can go up in level faster. So it's that is an interesting idea. The idea that plus it keeps characters, it's a good way to rationalize the fact that money tends to get spent and money tends to get frittered away. It has a tendency towards it has and it also keeps the characters kind of hungry and ready to go out and adventure some more. And that is a rather interesting idea that I think is, and I doubt I will ever play this. I doubt I will ever because I don't know anyone who plays 3.0. I don't know, most people have moved on to Pathfinder. It's but I would be curious to hear about anyone who did. It's an interesting what if idea. It's an interesting concept of taking the like the third edition and adding some of the old school elements to it. Anyways, this is me. This is Brian, Theoretical Gamer, 3.Y. Peace out.